Hello, welcome to Financial Literacy Econ 101 at Mott Community College. My name is Ed Durbin. I'll be your instructor this semester. A few things to kind of take care of before we move forward. One is perhaps most importantly, again, my name is Ed Durbin. I'll be your instructor for this term. This is a 1 credit hour class, so it moves very quickly, and we cover a good deal of ground in a very short period of time. Um, I just wanted to impress that upon you, and also to let you know that, again, since this is a 1 credit hour class, it's spread out over the entire term, the entire semester. But having said that, I have no trouble at all if you move through the course in a more rapid manner. You can complete the course, I have no doubt, within about a month or so if you really turn it on and move quickly through the material. And the way, again, that I have the class set up is such that you will be able to do just that. I have worksheets that you would be completing on a weekly basis, if you will, and they would be due at various points during the semester that I expect you to submit them and so on and so forth. But again, you can turn those if you so desire, you can turn those in all at one time. Go through all the worksheets, submit your work, and I will get back graded and submit a grade for you for the course. And again, anyway, back to the issue at hand. My name again is Ed Durbin. I've been teaching at Mott economics for the last 5 years, and I've been teaching in total for probably 20 years in a kind of a full-time manner, maybe a little less, 17, 18 years. But I have been teaching. I taught classes going back into the 1990s. So it's been probably about 25 years that I've been in front of classes at various points. Anyway, enough about me. So I'm well versed in this, and this is something that I have a passion for. And I hope to, my objective for you is for when you leave this course, you have a better understanding of what this personal finance means. Again, on a personal basis, this is something that you'll be dealing with, contending with your entire life. Usually, when people have issues, there's the root of that is money issues, monetary issues, funding issues, financial issues, and so this is not at all uncommon. And this hopefully this course will provide you with some groundwork that will again carry you forward through your life. Um, and what I'm going to include in this packet is something that you could do on your own. It would be a personal financial worksheet that you could work up, and there are several. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's not something that's required, but it's something that's yours to keep. Meaning that you can, if you so desire, you can fill in the spaces on the worksheet and kind of set up a plan, because that's what this is all about, is setting up to plan how you would like your life to go forward in a financial manner. And again, we'll be walking through all these steps as we do go forward. Um, so again, without any further delay, I'll go ahead and jump right in. So chapter one, this is an overview, of course. Personal financial planning and action. Okay, so these are the learning objectives, and I'll just walk through them. Personal financial planning, chapter learning objectives. Point one or 1.1, identify social and economic influences on personal financial goals and decisions. So it goes without saying that we do not live in a world in which we are the only people that are involved. We're surrounded by people. This is something where there's social interactions, and of course there are a lot of things that are happening external to us that either we cannot influence, or if we can influence, we can influence them to a certain degree, or to varying degrees, I should say. But there are a lot of moving parts in our worlds, in all of our worlds, individually and as a group. There are many things that are going on, and that's kind of what we're looking at with that. Second, 1.2, develop personal financial goals. So bearing that in mind, what we just said, that there are a lot of moving parts out there, a lot of variables, if you will. It doesn't preclude us, it doesn't stop us, or it shouldn't stop us from developing some personal goals that we can we kind of set out there, because unless we have goals, unless we set up markers out there in which we can hit going forward in life, we don't have direction. And so this is an important point. It's not just in finance, of course. These are life lessons, but again, finance has a lot to do with this. Again, the personal finance in particular. So 1.3, calculate time value of money situations associated with personal financial decisions. So this idea of the time value of money, very, very briefly, when we talk about time value of money, think about it this way. You have a dollar, or you've got $1,000, we'll say, in your possession. And uh, if you were to lend that to someone, say you're going to lend someone $1,000, and the terms by which you're setting up is that you would be getting 10% on an annual basis, 10% return on that, meaning that in 1 year's time, the person is going to repay you the $1,000, the principal, plus 10%, $100, the interest that's associated with it. So what this time value of money has to do with is something very, very simple, extremely powerful. And that is that $1,000 that is in your possession today, once you agree to this transaction, you give the $1,000 to someone else, and they take ownership of that $1,000 with um, the understanding that they would repay you, of course, but they now have possession of that $1,000. So you are separated from your money for that period of time, for that 1 year. And however you made the arrangements for the interest and the repayment of the principal, and we'll get into those kind of details as we go forward. But that's what we mean by the time value of money. Um, it's kind of the driver behind this, is that, again, in order for you to surrender, to give up that $1,000, you have an expectation. And this is what's referred to as opportunity cost in economics. Opportunity cost, what that means in a very specific manner, is that what it is that we surrender in order to get what we want, if you will. And opportunity cost has to do with uh, your next best competitive option, because at least in theory, if not in practice, when we do something like this, when you surrender the $1,000 for the 10%, it's with an understanding that that is your best option. Otherwise, why would you do it? Okay, this is the area that we talk about with opportunity costs. There are a lot of economic terms that are introduced in finance, and in fact, finance, the basis for finance, really what it comes down to is economics. Um, at any rate, moving forward. So that's calculating the time value of money. We'll get into that, and I'm still deliberating, but I think I might have you do a few problems. It would be very simple, just to walk through, that could be done with the tables that are included with the book, the time value of money tables. And at any rate, we'll walk through that. And finally, implementing a plan for making personal, financial, and career decisions. So this is that plan that I was referring to, and I will again have the software out there for it. But the idea behind this is that in order to move forward uh, with prosecuting your life, with taking charge of your life, if you will, um, it's you need to have some direction. You need to have some sense of where it is that you want to go and how it is that you're going to get there. This is that plan that we're talking about. And this last phase that we're looking at, 1.4, is implementing that plan. So this is after you already have the plan in place. And frankly, this is something to keep in mind, is the plan changes all the time, because what happens in life, one thing that we're guaranteed is that we have to deal with change. So I'll try to move more quickly as we go forward here. So to begin with, now, financial planning is a process of managing your money to achieve personal economic satisfaction. So the money, if you will, is out there to do what? It's to facilitate, to make your life, to make your life bearable, to go forward in life, to afford you things that, to take care of your basic needs, and hopefully beyond that, some things that you would like to do. To be able to do that in a manner in which you won't be, constantly broke, if you will, going forward. You want to plan these things out, and in the process, you're trying to gain some. The word is not happiness; it's to gain some peace of mind. Is really what we're saying. So, at any rate, the financial plan, it's a formalized report. Again, I'll say it one more time: is that included in your packet, or at least on your laptop, will be an Excel spreadsheet, Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And that's something that you can do on your own. And we'll talk about things as we kind of go forward. But it's out there and it's available for you to. What I recommend that you do is go into the file, open it, and save it as something different, something other than what the um, the, um, the template or the shell has. Personalize it for yourself. Okay, so again, the formalized report summarizes current financial situation and analyzes your financial needs and recommends future financial activity. So to put it in simple terms, you have a formalized report and you want to know exactly where you're at, whether that's you have $1,000 to spare, or you have $0 to spare, you're in debt to the tune of $1,000 or more, and so on and so forth. It's just a snapshot of where you're at to figure out where it is you're at, because in order to get where you want to go, you have to start from where you are at. So from that, of course, this is the analytical part, analyzing, trying to figure out what it is your budget is going to be going forward, what your financial needs are. And the last piece is recommend future financial activities, how it is that you're going to get to that point where you will you'll feel financially secure. So the advantages of financial planning are numerous, of course. The increased effectiveness in obtaining, using, and protecting financial resources. So this kind of gives you uh, an understanding of what it is in your toolbox, your financial toolbox. Um, and the idea here is that uh, is trying to identify things, identify how it is that you're going to dig yourself out of a hole, how it is you're going to accumulate assets, how it is you're going to move forward. So this is the next piece, is increased control of your financial affairs, is that peace of mind. Not being afraid of what bills are coming due. Not that they're not going to be coming due, but knowing that they're going to be coming due, and when and how it is that you're going to be able to pay for those bills, how it is that you're going to be able to achieve those things that you want in life. So this is that control piece, and you can only control so much. This is the human condition. We control many things, but most things are frankly beyond our control. But the things that we can control, we should learn how to control. And this is where, when we're talking about in the financial realm, this is why it's so important to gain an understanding of where you're at. And back to what I was saying before, is that the idea is that if you take care of this portion of your life, or if you have control over this portion of your life, it really does wonders in terms of any sort of personal relationships. Meaning that's one less thing to concern yourself with, to worry about. You can take care of yourself. You can take care of your family, um, and it opens the door for moving forward, because financial security is absolutely paramount, is absolutely important toward being able to move forward in your life, so that you have with some sense of control. You know, how much control, that's debatable, but at least there is a sense that you have some control over some of the things in your life. So it's very important. It opens the door for these relationships. Okay. So there's a sense of freedom from financial worries, and that's kind of wishful thinking in many ways, but that's the hope. Meaning that if you're able to achieve some of these things, again, we're able to control some aspects of our life. It's very, very important. And if you can do that from a financial perspective, it's one less thing to be concerned about it with your life if you can get your finances in order. So learning objective one, again, identify social economic influences um, on personal financial goals and decisions, life situation, and your personal values, where you're at in your life. Again, identifying where it is that you're at so that you can go forward. Identifying those personal values, those things that you hold dear to yourself. And this goes beyond just what you would like your life to be and so on and so forth. It has to do with, I think, on a very basic level, very important level, it has to do with morality and ethics. Think of it this way: um, ethics are kind of things that you should do. Meaning, if you make it even simpler, you want to get from Detroit to Chicago. So you know on the map you travel from Detroit going to Chicago, it's going from east to west. So you know how to kind of get there in general. You know the direction that you're going and the road map itself, the speed limits along the freeway and so on and so forth. Those are the guideposts. Those are the ones that are very specific things that are guiding. And this is what we're looking at when we're talking about personal values and so on and so forth. There are right ways of doing things and there are wrong ways, meaning that uh, if you if again in terms of finances that you don't want, yes, you want to be a millionaire, but in the same breath you don't want to harm people along the way. So that's really what we're driving at, is that you can do this within the normal framework. You just have to, it takes a lot of discipline, um, and it takes a good deal of hard work, of course, and but it's something that is obtainable. It's something that's reachable. Okay. So financial planning in our economy, there are a lot of things that are going on in the economy that are, again, external to us. So in economics, in macroeconomics, the idea is that the focus is um, on employment or unemployment, how the economy is doing, right? We'll start fresh here. So is the economy expanding? Is it growing? Is it retracting? Is the economy in good shape, okay shape, or so on and so forth? And it goes without saying right now that with the COVID situation, it's very difficult to kind of put your finger on A, where we're at, and B, where we're going and how we're going to get there. And as a world, as this continues to unfold around us. But at any rate, economic growth, uh, employment or unemployment, meaning um, uh, how it is that the labor markets are doing. Are jobs available for people? So on and so forth, right? And last, we're looking at inflation, or if you will, price level changes. So inflation or deflation. Inflation is an increase in the overall weighted average of prices. Deflation is a reduction, or it's it's reducing um, the the price levels are reducing, okay, or falling. So the last thing we're looking at here would be, and of course, there the domestic economic influences, global influences. We live in a world that's highly interconnected. That's We all have heard the term we live in a global economy, and that's true. The U.S. economy, for example, is very much dependent upon imports and exports, trade, and international finance, very much at the center of both the U.S. So a good portion of our economy, probably I think 15-20% of our economy. Some economies are much, much more, but ours is about 15-20% of our huge economy. Um, has to deal with, directly, if you will, and with global markets. So inflation, we've already indicated, talked about. Um, there, of course, the domestic economic influences, the global influence I just pointed out. Inflation has to, again, to do with price level changes, an increase in the overall weighted average of prices and interest rates. Again, we pointed back, go back to The interest rates, if you are very, very straightforward, if you're lending somebody money, if you're going to lend them the $1,000 that we referred to before, you want to get what? The highest interest rate possible. And if you're borrowing $1,000, you're on the other side of the table, if you will. You want to borrow at the lowest possible interest rate. So interest rates are extremely, extremely important. They're extremely important in terms of the economy, of economic growth in our own personal life. We want to buy things, we want to purchase things, and if we don't have the cash, if you will, the funds to purchase something, we do what? We borrow. And there's nothing wrong with that. It makes perfect sense, and we'll discuss this as we're going forward. But all the cost of that borrowing is what? The interest that we're paying on that loan, the terms that we have to contend with in terms of that loan. So life cycle, life situation and personal values, the adult life cycle. This, stepping back, there's something called the life cycle hypothesis. And what that means is that very straightforward. It's kind of a rule of thumb. Rule of thumb meaning it's in general that we're talking about this. And that is that in your life, when you're young, you are working, presumably. You're working and you're trying to do what? To raise families, to so on and so forth. And so the idea is that when you're young, you are what is referred to as a net borrower. It's another term is a deficit budget unit, but we won't go there. The point is that you're borrowing in order to what? To live your life. And the reason you're borrowing is that you want to consume. And in order to consume, you have to have an income to support that. And if your income is not equal to or greater than that, than what you desire to consume or what you want to spend, then you have to do what? You have to borrow. So typically younger people in general, and when I say younger people, anyone from age, we'll just say 18 through 55 or 60 years of age, in fact, and we can get into this. It's not a hard rule of thumb and so on. So it's not cut in stone. These are things that are they're general ideas. And again, the idea is that when you are young, you're borrowing more because you want to consume more. You want to consume more than your income allows. And what do we spend that on? We spend that for such things as buying cars, buying transportation, buying homes. Homes are expensive items, or even so mortgages and so on and so forth. Typically, people don't have the $100,000 they need to buy the home, right? When you're young, in particular, you have to borrow in order to do that. You have to obtain mortgages. And also, if you're young, you want to do what? You want to have a family. You want to raise a family, and families are not inexpensive. They're not cheap. It's very expensive to raise a family. So in order to do this, we have to fund this. In order to fund this, we have to borrow. We have to borrow from somebody somewhere. And so just strictly speaking, within the context of people, is we would be borrowing from people that are looking to what? Looking to lend. And the idea, again, is that when you're older, presumably, I mentioned age 55, 60, maybe even 65, doesn't matter. You want to do what? You want to retire. And if you want to retire, what that means is that you're no longer working or you're working less. And in order to work less, you still want to do what? To consume. So what you do in order to kind of make that happen, so in order to be able to be retired for a few years, your golden years, which aren't always all that golden, but for your retirement years, is that you want to be able to fund that. In order to fund that, you have to do what? You have to have a retirement plan. You have to have a retirement portfolio. You have to have savings. You have to have pensions and so on and so forth. And in order to achieve that, you have to lend money to other people, to invest in other things in order to achieve that. So this is the life cycle hypothesis. On the one hand, you've got young people that are borrowing in order to live life, to do the, to consume beyond their means. And then you've got the other portion of people that are older that are wanting to invest in those young people who want to borrow, if you will. So this is the life cycle hypothesis. Um, at any rate, walking through, we'll move on. Life situation factors, marital status, household size, employment, all these things, funding that your life choices, if you will. Various major events, graduation, marriage, divorce, all these are expensive things in order to pay for. It's not the graduation, it's the cost of that education. The birth of children, more children become more expensive. And these are not bad things. These are wonderful things. Of course, this is what we need as society, but there's a cost that's associated with it. And then there's always a career or health changes. Career, you were expecting to be working at a job forever, and it turns out that that's not going to be the case because your employer has moved or your employment situation has changed in some manner. Um, Health changes, these are things that we all have to contend with. We deal with it with family members, with parents, with grandparents, etc. We realize that we want the mind is willing, but the body is not. The body is unable to do these things. We can no longer do at age 50, 60, 70 what we were doing at age 20. These are just facts. So things happen, so far as your health is concerned. Always have to kind of count that as a blessing and also something to be concerned about. Um, at any rate, the values, the ideas, and principles you consider correct, desirable, and important. These are things that the framework in which we prosecute, we live our lives, and try to keep true to ourselves, if you will, as we're kind of moving forward. So we have to keep all these things kind of in check, and if not in check, we have to keep them have to keep them in mind, if you will, as we're making these decisions going forward. So financial planning and our these are things that we can't control, right? These are things that are beyond our individual control, what's happening in the economy. So we have to be aware of these things. This is where an understanding of basic economics is important. Business, labor, and government, again, as I was referring to before, you're looking at the three pillars of macroeconomics being economic growth, employment, unemployment, um, and price level changes. So businesses in order to wanting to grow, if you are a business owner, what is it that you desire? If we've all heard the term other people's money, and what we want to do is in order to grow, it's not always the case, but it makes sense if it makes sense. Financial decisions are made again if you have a positive cash flow. If you're borrowing in order to purchase a vehicle to get to work, and the job that you want is something where there's an increase in your pay, and it justifies the actual purchase of the vehicle, then you go ahead with the purchase. Same thing in business. Business people, if they want to expand, if they want to grow their company, if the interest rates are reasonable, then they go out and borrow in order to what? To ensure growth of the business, to ensure the security of the business. On the labor side, it's very important, of course, because if you don't have a job, you're not employed, and if you're not employed, you can't pay your bills. This is very straightforward. Government interaction in this process is that, in part, government's role is to try to help smooth in terms of economics, to smooth economic growth, to ensure economic growth, to ensure economic stability. And that comes in many, many formats. And what we look at here, the next thing is the Federal Reserve, which is also referred to as the Fed. It's called the Federal Reserve System. You may or may not have heard of this before, but they're basically the nation's central bank, the U.S.'s central bank, and their primary role is in terms of monetary policy, money policy, and monetary financial decisions. Back to what we were talking about before on a personal level, if you want to buy a vehicle, or If you own a business and you want to expand your business, to grow your business, you're going to be using other people's money in order to finance that. And in order to make that happen, their interest rates are involved. And again, this is where the Fed or the Federal Reserve is involved in affecting interest rates. Okay, we can, if you take an economics course, you can get into some great detail on this, but the idea is that the Fed is out there to, again, ensure financial stability, security, those things that we talked about before, economic growth, maintain employment or reduce lower unemployment, and to keep inflation at bay, to keep price levels moderate, okay? Price increases, inflation at a moderate rate. So this is kind of the Fed's role. This is the big picture, if you will, trying to control a lot of these things. And there are many, many moving parts that, again, go well beyond ourselves. So financial planning in our economy, domestic influences. Again, these are things that influence us, impact us as we're kind of going forward. I have a different kind of way of presenting this, but that's okay. We'll stick with the way the author presents this. And this is what I refer to as the circular flow of financial activity. And basically what it means is that if you look on the left, the providers, if we go back to our life cycle hypothesis, when you're young, you're a net borrower. You're lending, or excuse me, you're borrowing from other people in order to finance to live your life. And the other side is going to be are the net lenders, those folks that are trying to grow their assets, to grow their wealth, in order to live their life going forward without having to work quite as much. So it's kind of flipped around, meaning that on the left-hand side, those are in general the older people, will say, and on the right-hand side would be the younger people, the users, the borrowers, the spenders of those funds. So we'll start from the left. This is where this diagram is, and if we break the economy down into different sectors. So the sectors would be the individuals or people, if you will, individual, private individuals, businesses, government, and other foreign entities, foreign, companies, foreign nations as well, of course. So what happens is that in this, on the left-hand side, you have more money than you know what to do with. I shouldn't say, excuse me, you shouldn't say it that way, but you have an excess amount of funds. So you have more money than you actually need to live your life. So what you want to do then is you want to invest that because later on in your life, you want to be able to do what? You want to be able to retire and so on and so forth. So just think about this as individuals having more funds than they need at the moment. The same, all this goes to businesses, government. If you have excess funds, you want to be able to invest these things. So what you do is you go through, there are two different ways of doing this. One would be direct finance and the other one would be indirect finance. And we'll stick with this idea of indirect finance. So we would be going through financial intermediaries. You have excess money, you don't carry cash with you, or you don't put it under your mattress, you put it into a bank, a credit union. Insurance companies, same idea. Investment companies, other financial institutions, the same idea. You are surrendering your money. Remember that time value money? You're surrendering your funds, your resources in order to what? To get interest, to cover what is, again, is called the opportunity cost. But we'll speak more to that as we kind of go forward. Because you're not just going to give someone your money without getting some interest in return. This is, again, that opportunity cost idea. And where those funds are, so you have the financial intermediaries, and what they do is that they want to make sure that they're borrowing the funds, in essence, from you. And their role is to lend them themselves to another party, that other party being the users on the right-hand side, the borrowers, the spenders of funds, those individuals, those businesses, governments, and foreign entities. So think about it this way. overall individuals, so there are 330 million people in the U.S. as an entire sector of individuals, an entire economic group. Um, they have more money in toto than they actually need to live their life today. So this is in total we're looking at. So they're a provider of funds. They are surplus budget units. They have more money than they actually need to live their lives. The next group we're looking at are businesses. Businesses, remember we said before, other people's money. Businesses as a total sector, as an entire group in the entire country, they are net borrowers. And the reason they're net borrowers, of course, is because in order to grow your company, at some point you have to borrow. It makes sense, financial sense to do, as I said before. Okay. And the last group first is foreign entities, and the foreign sector would include such things as China and so on and so forth, and also those individual companies, foreign companies, and on an overall basis, they are net lenders, kind of like individuals. On an overall basis, they're lending more than they're actually borrowing. Okay. And lastly is government. Government, of course, is a deficit budget unit, or they borrow net in total. And the reason we know this is because of the massive debt that's out there, that we have as on a federal level. We started before the COVID, back in March. We had March 2020. Um, the overall debt was about $23 trillion. Huge, huge, enormous number. Um, since that time, so going, fast forwarding to, we'll say, September of 2020, the overall debt is, I'm guessing here, but I'm probably fairly close, and it's going to go up considerably from here as well, is at about $30 trillion. So we increased our overall debt by $7 trillion. That's trillion with a T as in Tony. Okay. So what all that means is that, to put it into perspective, because these numbers are huge, they're enormous. The overall U.S. economy, for example, last year would have grown at about $20 trillion. So if we're looking at all the economic transactions, the GDP, the gross domestic product, being at about $20 trillion, we owe more than what we're actually kind of is more than the economic activity for 1 year. So just to kind of give perspective. So this is the interchange. The financial markets are where all these transactions take place. Stock markets, the bond markets, money markets, commodity markets. Stock markets are equities. These are shares. So shares in you own a share of stock in Apple, for example, and I'm not sure what it's going for, but I'm sure it's $1,000 or more. Um, what is that share of stock worth? It all depends. On a day-to-day, minute by second basis, it goes up and down, depending upon what the demand, if you will, for that share of stock in the stock market. The next are the bond markets. The bond markets are, think about it this way, loans. You're borrowing money to purchase a vehicle, to purchase a car. So you agree to certain terms, how long, how much the loan is going to be for, how long you're going to have that loan. Is it going to be 48 months, 60 months, 72 months, 84 months for that matter, to repay the loan, and what interest rates you're going to be paying on that loan. This is where bond markets are at. Bond markets are the place where government and corporate, companies, businesses lend money to individuals, for example, or other businesses and other governments. It can borrow. The markets go back and forth all the time. But again, the point being that with the bond market, this is if you own a bond, for example, uh, General Motors, a bond from General Motors, you paid $1,000 for the bond, and on that bond, on that bond, on that piece of paper, which they're no longer paper, it's all electronic, but you agreed to General Motors agrees to pay you back that $1,000, so that principal, and at whatever interest rate over a period of time. So these are bond markets, and these are things that, much in the manner of the stock market, they're traded back and forth all the time. Money markets, those that has to do with um, similar ideas in terms of bonds and loans and so on and so forth, but they're within the framework of about a year. So less than a year, bonds less than a year are typically called money markets. This is where money markets occur, meaning people looking for short-term loans. Businesses in particular looking for a short-term loan. You have a credit union or a bank, and you can get CDs, 30, 60, 90-day CDs, 120-day CDs, 180-day CDs, and those are, in essence, those are just terms by which you loan money to the bank, to the financial institution for whatever period that we're talking about, so that the bank can in turn loan that money out, right? So these are the financial markets that we're talking about. So lastly would be commodity markets. These are the interesting ones because this is where you have things such as, when you're talking about commodities, you're looking at, basic necessities, if you will, meaning oil, natural gas, for heating purposes, of course, and transportation purposes. We're looking at food, wheat, corn, um, cattle, beef prices, chicken price, all these things that there are markets for, and you have a certain price certain at that point in time, and also you can look forward to what the price is going to be going forward. So these are all very, very interesting. And this is the exchange where we go from the folks that want to lend money for interest to get some interest, and keeping in mind that time value of money, and there are folks that want to borrow, the users on the right hand side. Anyhow, so financial planning in our economy, global influences. U.S. economy is affected by foreign investors and competition from foreign companies. This all goes without saying. That we live in a global, very complex world where transactions in Shanghai, China, impact Detroit, Flint, southeastern Michigan, Lapeer, etc. All these, you're impacted by things that happen outside of the domestic framework, outside of our little world that we have, that we live in. We're affected by all of these transactions. Um, so there are financial transactions. That would be international finance, if you will, versus the goods and services that are traded, and that's international trade. So again, now we're looking at the level of imports and exports and how that affects the available supply of dollars, supply and the demand for the dollars, for that matter. So what that means is that in order to import, just a real quick example, you want to import something from China into the U.S. Very common, right? Pretty much everything that we have is imported, or I shouldn't say imported, but much of it is imported, and much of what's imported is coming from China. So that Chinese company that's selling those products in the U.S., they have to receive what? In payment, they receive dollars. So if they receive dollars, that means that there are more dollars. There's an increase in supply of dollars overall. In order to make that transaction happen. And what good are dollars don't work for a Chinese company in China. For example, excuse me, China, domestically in China, you cannot spend dollars legally, but we won't go there. But you can't be in possession of dollars, so you've got to do what? You've got to exchange dollars for the Chinese currency, the yuan, the yuan, Chinese yuan. And in the process, of course, you end up with what? Excess dollars. So this is what we're talking about, the available supply of dollars, is that when you have excess amount of dollars, or how that impacts the prices. And we won't really get into it, but supply and demand, if there's an increased supply of something, nothing else has changed, ceteris paribus, another economics term. If nothing else is affected, nothing else changes, if you have an increased supply of dollars, then there's going to be a reduction, if you will, in the demand for those dollars. They're not going to be worth as much. Anyway, level of foreign investment affects domestic money supply. Similar idea here. If you're a Chinese company that is investing in the U.S. and you have to do all of your transactions in dollars, and you have to, when you repatriate or bring those dollars back to, your back to China, you have to do what? You have to exchange those dollars once again for Chinese currency. So this impacts the money supply, of course. Money supply affects consumer interest rates. So if you have an increased amount of dollars that are available out there in general, and we won't get into the details of this, it has a tendency to do what? There's more dollars that are available in the system, so there would be, at least in theory, there would be less of a demand for those dollars, and less of a demand for the dollars, that would be would cause the interest rates to go down. So it impacts the interest rates. It's kind of the takeaway. And I'll try to move a little more quickly here. Financial planning in our economy. First is inflation. Again, is the increase in the general level of prices. Um, all these things go without saying, but we'll walk through. It reduces the buying power of the dollar, um, meaning that if, say, for example, there's inflation, so there's the price of a gallon of milk goes up. Unless your income goes up to meet that increase or match that increase, what that means is that in order to purchase that gallon of milk, it's going to take a larger portion of your budget. So it reduces your buying power, your own purchasing power, if you will. So again, we're moving on. It's most harmful to those on fixed incomes. You always hear this, people that are on Social Security or elderly, et cetera, that are on fixed incomes. Inflation harms them considerably. Um, Inflation rates do go up and down. They're measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is under the Department of Labor. And we'll get into this in a minute, but there are different ways of measuring this, but it's measured on a monthly basis in essence. Then the next portion is hidden inflation. Hidden inflation, I don't know if I really like the idea, but there are a lot of things where you don't know that you're paying more, but you are. Example, and I'll be very earthy with these two examples, but let's just say that you're an easier one. Ice cream. Ice cream used to be when you would buy a half gallon of ice cream, you would get a half gallon of ice cream. Today, they don't say this, but it still comes in pretty much the same container, meaning the half gallon container, but you do not get a half gallon of ice cream. You get something less than the 64 fluid ounces, or however the half gallon, I think it's 64 ounces anyways. You'd be getting some amount smaller, paying the same price. That's hidden inflation. So you're reducing the size of what's being sold, but the quantity of what's being sold, but you're keeping the price at the same level, means that there's some inflation. That's the hidden inflation. Another one, real easy one, toilet paper. Toilet paper used to be, and I forget, I guess, uh, 5 inches wide or whatever. And what happened was, a number of years ago, is that you'd buy a 12-pack of toilet paper or a 6-pack of toilet paper, and it would be a certain price. And then, so what happened was that in order to economize on the company side, they reduced the width of the toilet paper. So charging the same price for less of the product. That's hidden inflation. CPI is a measure of inflation from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. So that's what consumers pay for goods and services in the economy, and they're measured, again, it's on a monthly basis, and you can annualize that. So we're really looking from the change over the prior 12 months. That's what the thing that is most concerning. So at any rate, that's the CPI. The other portion of that is the PPI, the Producer Price Index, because in order to provide those goods and services, the producer has to do what? To produce those goods and services. And in order to produce those goods and services, they have to buy things, and the things that they buy are subject to those same price level changes. so it's subject to inflation and so on and so forth. So there's the CPI, consumer price index rather, and the PPI, the producer price index. And this measure typically is inflationary, meaning the prices tend to rise in general. Not always. There can be deflation, which we refer to down below. That's a decline in prices. And prices can decline and have declined in, especially when you consider such things as oil, um, crude oil, and a lot of that has had to do with fracking, meaning that if you go back 10, 15 years ago, price of oil was quite high, and the reason being is that we were importing most of our oil from where? From OPEC countries, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, so on and so forth. We were importing a huge amount of our portion of our energy, period, oil, natural gas. Today, not quite so much, and that's because of our domestic production. So that's caused prices to actually go down so far as in the energy sector is concerned. That's deflationary. Financial planning in our economy, we talk about interest rates. Interest rates are the price, if you will, or as it says here, the cost of money, the cost of borrowing. It's affected again by the supply and demand. And the next thing I should have introduced this probably earlier, but when we talk about the risk premium, uh, the length of time the funds are in use, how long you're separated from your money, that time value of money, how long you're separated from your $1,000. Is it 1 year, 5 year, 10 years? And of course, the longer that you're separated from your money, the more insecure you are about this. So that, of course, the longer you're separated from money, interest rates have a tendency to rise as a result. There are times when that's not necessarily the case, but we won't kind of go there. So just kind of keep that in mind. The longer you're away from your money, the higher the more risk that's embedded in that in terms of getting it back. So time value of money. Next thing we're looking at is the inflation, what the expectations are for future prices. So if you're expecting a lot of inflation, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you would expect, if you're lending for longer periods of time, you would expect not only higher interest rate based on that being separate from money, but also to that anticipated higher inflation going forward. Lastly, uncertainty, and this is a general thing, uncertainty in terms of which way the economy is going. Well, is inflation going to be occurring? Are we going to have, is there going to be how anything can be, uncertainty is a huge umbrella, and we'll talk more about interest rates, of course, as we're going forward. And all this has a major impact on financial planning. So these are all things to consider, and it's not, when I say consider, you have to understand that they're out there. Many of these things we really can't do much about, but we have to consider this when we're making these decisions as to what we want to do so far as our financial plan is concerned. So this is a quick walkthrough on the course, and we're going to shoot for getting through all 14 chapters. And chapter 1 has to do with obtaining those funds in order to, how it is that we're going to have to be able to fund our retirement and so on and so forth, right? Jobs and so on and so forth, and the planning that's involved with chapters 2 and 3, the saving, what it is that we're going to be, what vehicles, what instruments, financial instruments we're going to use in order to get where we want to go in terms of stocks and bonds and mutual funds, and we'll get into that investing much later on. But this is in general the idea is that one critical thing to note here. When there's an expression, and I'll say this over and again, different types of expressions, but there's an expression is that it's most important to pay yourself first. What that means is that you get your paycheck, you receive whatever it is that income is, and you pay yourself first. And what you do with what you pay yourself with is critically important, especially when you're young. Meaning that if you try to save as much as you can when you're young, it goes, again, these things go without saying, but it's an important thing to note because when you're young, uh, your the longer that you can, based on that time value of money, the longer that you can invest in whatever it is that you want to, that you're using, the more that money is going to grow. And we'll talk about this again as we're going forward. But that's kind of the general idea. Is that is again speaking to that time value of money. Anyway, onward. So borrowing, does it make sense to borrow? Everybody borrows, and it's not a bad thing to borrow. It's not something that is something you avoid entirely. It's something you have to be careful with, of course, because when you borrow, you have to repay. But there's a general rule again in finance, and that is that if you if you're whatever it is you're borrowing, if that results in a positive cash flow, so you go and you have to borrow to purchase that vehicle that you're going to be using to drive to and from work, and your commute is 15, 20 miles each way, then it makes sense, so long as you end up with a positive cash flow as a result of this. So these are things to keep in mind. Spending, what it is you're spending on. There are two different types of spending. There's spending on non-durable, spending on durable goods. Non-durable goods are things that we buy all the time. Milk, eggs, so on and so forth. We pay for our rent and, et cetera. These are things uh, that we're buying consistently over and over again, versus longer term things there or durable goods, which would be cars and houses and appliances and so on and so forth. Things that we don't purchase every day, every week, every year, but hopefully we buy a car, it's going to last us a few years. Or if you're leasing a car or whatever the circumstance, it's going to be over a period of time. Risk, it just points back to the risk that we were talking about, the risk that's associated with inflation, uncertainty, all the things that we're going, just being separated from your money for a year. There's a risk involved in that. Um, and it's rolling the dice in many ways, but at least you're able to identify what that risk is. Very important. Lastly, or the last couple things, would be investing in retirement estate planning. Investing, we'll get into that in a few details. What it is that you would be investing, and that depends upon where you're at in life. A lot of it, and we'll get into real briefly. When you're young, meaning you're not planning on retiring for 10, 15, 20 years, make it 5 years. So you're 5 years from retirement or more. This is where you would be willing to take on much more risk than if you were a year away from retirement or actually in retirement itself. So the reason that you want to take on, or you would be willing to take on more risk, is because with risk, it becomes an increased return. We'll talk about these things. There are some strategies that are involved with this that are very important. So back to our learning objectives, time frames for achieving your financial goals. Short-term goals are within 1 year. That's that money market thing that we had mentioned before. Intermediate goals are 1 to 5 years, and then long-term goals are greater than 5 years. A lot of this has to do with that timing of that risk as well. Short-term goals within 1 year, it's not very risky, so interest rates are probably not all that high. Intermediate goals, 1 to 5 years, interest rates would be higher, and long-term goals would be much more risk involved, perhaps, if you're up for it. Um, and the interest rates would be significantly higher. We'll talk about these things as we go. Financial needs, again, we've already talked about this, non-consumable products, or rather consumable products, goals, food, clothing. These are the non-durables versus the durable goods, cars, appliances, etc., things that we don't buy quite as much. So we've got to kind of think more about those purchases than we do when we go and buy a gallon of milk. Because even though a gallon of milk, the price fluctuates significantly, we watch prices all the time. All of us do, whether we're shopping online or in the store, we're always looking at prices. Um, but those smaller purchases don't harm us as much. They can, but at least in the near term, they don't harm us quite as much as making poor decisions so far as purchasing a car, for example, things that we think more about. Lastly, the intangible purchase goals. This is education, healthcare, health period. Education, what we're looking at when we're talking about education, health, it's called human capital. It's an expression, again, in economics. And what we're looking at is that what we're doing to improve the human being, our own condition, meaning the rationale behind getting an education. It can be very expensive, a lot of opportunity costs involved, but nonetheless, we go ahead and we do that because we realize that that will pay off for us at some point in time. Could, sometimes not, but you know, it certainly is. That's kind of the take on it, if you will, out there is that the more education you have, or at least so far as like it has to be the proper education, like with anything else, the more education that you have in general, the better off you will be so far as your income is going forward. And so far as health is concerned, same idea. The more you invest in your health, the exercise, making sure that you have health care, insurance, and keeping up with all these things. This is all about, there's an expense involved in this. It's not inexpensive, but it's something that will pay off. This is our objective, is to increase our human capital, to make it pay for us on a personal level. So goal setting guidelines, SMART approach, and just using that as an acronym, thinking SMART. SMART S is specific, be very specific in those goals, try to be as specific as you can. Measurable, see how you're doing, if you will, if you're going forward. Are you making progress, or do you have to change your plan? It happens. So this is something where you're constantly going through and taking stock of where you're at in life, if you will. And in response to those measurables, whether you're achieving things or not, you have to take action, right? And you have to be realistic. You can't say, well, I'm going to reduce my expenses by 80% when you can't do that. It's just not possible. For example, I mean, wish we all could do that, turn around and reduce our spending by 80%. But typically, when we're talking about reducing, making, saving in some manner, it's typically not all that much. It's incremental, usually smaller chunks. But we have to be realistic about this. And we also have to consider the last thing is time basis, is that time value of money that we talked about, that opportunity cost, the meaning that in order to gain, we have to look long term. We have to have these long term objectives, like what it is. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to grow, but it's going to take time to grow. These are things that, this is where regret lives, where you'll look back in 20 years and saying, oh my goodness, I should have saved much more than I did. But you can't change that. You've got to figure out where you're at and kind of go forward. That's where this is an endless cycle, if you will, going through and doing these things. But it's very important to understand that they does not happen overnight. It takes time. Okay, learning objective 3, using time value of money. This is something where I want to see if I might give you a couple of questions on this, but we'll go through it nonetheless here. And this is when I've already brought this term up, opportunity cost, what you give up to make a choice. There's a trade-off in this decision. So a trade-off is not necessarily, they're not the same. Trade-off and opportunity cost. There are trade-offs involved with opportunity cost, but opportunity cost is something very, very specific, meaning that you're looking at your next best competitive option. The $1,000 that you're going to lend to somebody, you're going to be getting a 10% return on that money, but you have to consider, is that your best option? A lot of stuff goes into that. What's the risk that's involved, so on and so forth. So this is where opportunity cost is at, where you try to figure out, so your next best competitive option you decide is 10%. It may actually be a lower number, meaning that you incurred too much risk and the person doesn't pay you off. So you're not covering your opportunity cost. It gets kind of I'm getting into the weeds a bit here. It gets kind of, the term is wonky. Meaning there's some very specific things we can look at, but the takeaway here is that when we're looking at opportunity costs, as the author puts it here, is what you give up making a choice. But very specifically, what it is your next best competitive option. It's trade-offs. one for another, you're doing something in lieu or instead of doing something else. Yes, it's all involved. You're taking this class right now and it's keeping you away from doing other things. There's a trade-off. Um, but you've made a decision at some point in time that the opportunity cost was such that it made sense for you to take this class to better yourself, to improve yourself, because you do realize that at some point in time you're going to get the payoff. You're going to see a payoff for doing this, which is true, hopefully. Um, should be. Not always measurable in dollars, maybe time. Again, we have limited amount of time. Could be measured in virtually anything. But again, when we're talking about opportunity costs, it goes well beyond just the financial realm, just goes well beyond dollars. It goes well, what it is we're going to be using our time. We're dedicating our time to doing something when we could be using our time to do something else. So the last thing is consider those lost opportunities resulting from those decisions. That's the crux of opportunity cost. So you've got to consider these things. Are you going to buy this thing for $10? If you buy this thing for $10, you're going to satisfy yourself in the consumer context. But is it something that you can live without? Is it something that could be better used for something else? Is it something that is the $10 is something that we could save, save and put away? So there's a very important point to note is that saving, for example, setting aside money, not consuming, incurs a very, very high opportunity cost because all of us, every one of us would rather consume to spend rather than to save. So keep this in mind. Um, but also keep in mind that the more you save right now, uh, the more likely it is that at a later date you will be able to consume more or be able to consume more than you would otherwise if you hadn't saved. We'll leave it at that. More to follow. So the time value of money, again, is increase the amount of money as a result of interest earned. Saving today equals more money tomorrow. We've already gone through this. Spending today is lost interest, meaning that if you can't have your cake and eat it too, because what happens if you eat your cake? It's gone. You can't get it back. That's all these little adages, these sayings kind of come home to roost when we start talking about many of these things, many of these topics. Savings and spending decisions involve considering the trade-offs. It drives you crazy, but um, it helps us. The more we do this up front, the more we consider, the more we think about these things up front, the less we have in terms of what after the fact buyer's remorse. So there's buyer's remorse, meaning that you bought something and you wish after the fact that you hadn't bought it. No matter what it is you buy, you typically experience some degree of buyer's remorse. But if you do as much homework as you can up front, and again, without driving yourself crazy or too crazy, the less buyer's remorse that you will experience. Because remember, there's the other side too. There's the seller's remorse. My goodness, why did I sell it for $50 when I could have sold it for $75? There's the other side too. So always keep that in mind. There's always two sides to any of these transactions. All right. Savings and spending decisions involve considering the trade-offs. Again, current needs can make spending worthwhile. Uh, Meaning again that if you need something, if you need to buy a car, to consider why it is that you need to buy a car. Do you need to have transportation? Do you want to have a really nice car to impress your friends and so on and so forth? Remember that you're going to be paying for that going forward. So always consider. Most important is to consider creature comforts, what you need up front, what you need right now. What you really need. You have to consider these things again, because otherwise you end up with that buyer's remorse. Time value of money interest calculation, calculating interest. This is very simple. Principal is the amount of money that we're talking about, that $1,000 that we were referring to. And the interest rate, we're looking at this on an annual basis, the interest. Excuse me, we're looking at it for 1 year, and the time period is the length of money that we're talking about. Is it how many time periods? Is it 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, etc. And the interest that results from it. So the equation is the amount of principal, the saving, times the annual interest rate, times the period of time that we're talking about. So if it's at 10% for 1 year, $1,000, 10% for 1 year, that equates to $100 in interest. Okay, very straightforward. Time value of money interest calculation. In this case, we're looking at $500, 6% for 6 months, not a year, but for 6 months. So for half a year times 1/2 is equal to not $30, that would be for a full year, but half of that is $15. So, excuse me. So again, going forward with these, we're looking at the time value of money, different types of calculations. The future value is equal to the amount that will be available at a later date. What it's going to be later on after you're saving, if you will, or after you're spending, what that future value is going to be. The present value, always keeping in mind interest. The current value or the principal that you have, and what it is that you want, what it is that you need in the future. Meaning that if you have, a certain amount of money right now, or if you want a certain amount of money in the future, you're backing into this saying, how much do I need right now in order to invest, in order to achieve that goal down the road? So that's the present value. So we're going forward, future value, and back in terms of present value. Very simple way of looking at this. Keep it as simple as you can because it can get extremely, extremely complicated. Sorry about the coughing, but I want to make sure we get through this. Time value of money calculation methods, the formula calculation, the TVM or the time value money tables, financial calculator, spreadsheet software, websites, and apps. So you're restricted, of course, with going through number one, the formula calculations. You can do this with pencil and paper, or if you have a simple calculator, you can do this as well. The formula calculations, the time value of money tables, which are included in the book, they're extremely helpful, and they serve the same purpose. It's just that they're laid out in such a way that the calculations are done up front for you. These are very common. Financial calculators, these are Texas Instrument, Hewlett Packard typically have, they're the financial calculators that we use, the handheld calculators that are not the simple calculators, but programmable calculators, so on and so forth, that you can calculate, plug in numbers to calculate your interest. Spreadsheet software, Microsoft Excel, probably the easiest one, website and apps, but I know that the website and apps are something that I tend to, I use them frequently, but to gain an understanding, you really should be focusing on number one, formula calculations, using the time value of money tables, or one of the other two, the financial calculator, or using Microsoft Excel. The one where you really understand this best is doing the formula calculations and probably the time value of money tables to get an understanding. Because there are a lot of different ways they're going to be looking at this time value of money. Meaning, you're starting with a current $1,000 and what that's going to look like in 10 years' time, or 1 year's time rather. And what happens is that if you're looking at a 10-year period, this is something to think about. You start out with $1,000, and in 1 year you have $1,100. So in year two, you're starting with $1,100, and you're going to be getting 10% on that $1,000 or $1,100 in year after year one. So what is your interest earned after year two? It's at $1,100 times 10%. Okay, so it's $110 that is tacked onto that, and it continues to grow. This is also when we start talking about the time value of money. When you start talking about accruing this interest, getting this interest over time, compounding that interest over time. This is how you get your your money to grow at a much more rapid rate than you probably think possible. Uh, anyway, so the formula calculation, it's very important to understand. Time value money tables makes life a lot simpler. Financial calculators are fine. Spreadsheet software, Microsoft Excel is okay. And the closer you get to number 5, the easier it is to accomplish this. But the starting from number 1, that's where you really understand. That's what I want you to focus on. Okay. So again, future value, the increased value of money from interest earned, amount to which the current savings will increase to. So where you're going to. The total amount available in the future, compounding is earning interest on your interest. That was that $1,000 that we had talked about. So you go from $1,000 after 1 year, you have $1,100. And then the interest, the compounding means that you're getting 10% interest, not on the $1,000, but on the $1,100, that $1,100. That's the compounding. You're earning more interest. And I'll stop right here to bring up a subject, a topic. It's called, this is a rule of thumb. This is another one of these expressions in economics, right? Excuse me. Another one of these expressions in economics, and that is that with this rule of thumb, that is the rule of 72, rather. That is the rule of 72. Excuse me. Is that what you're saying is that how long it takes? I've got to turn off my phone here. How long it takes for you to grow that, to double your investment. So this is something that's very typical in economics. We use it for a variety of things, but this is your how long it takes to grow your investment. So let's just say, for example, you're earning 8% a year, which is kind of a typical rate of interest for stocks overall for the last 100 years. It's probably returned about 8% a year. The meaning that how long is it going to take for you to double your $1,000? So your $1,000 investment, if you're getting 8% return on that, 8% interest on an annual basis through this compounding route, how long does it take for you to go from $1,000 to $2,000? So what you do is you take 72 or 70, it doesn't matter. It's approximate. This is guesswork, or it's close enough, if you will. So 72 divided by 8% divided by 8 is equal to 9, meaning that over the course in 9 years, your money will double from $1,000 to $2,000. This is why this compounding is so important, because if you start young, 20, 25, 30, it doesn't matter when you start. The idea is that if you can set money aside at a certain amount of interest, and the interest rates can vary and so on and so forth depending upon your investment. But if you could set something aside, then your money will grow. And this is how it may take 20, 30, 40 years to get to where you want to be, but this is how you get there. By you start small, and there are different ways of doing this. You can continue to add to it. If you just start with $1,000 and you're kicking in another $100 a year, it's going to grow that much faster. So we'll get into these things. This is all about, again, this time value of money and compounding, and it's very exciting, actually, when it comes right down to it. So anyway, future value formula method. Future value is equal to the original savings amount, or the principal, plus whatever interest earned. So for $100 deposited for 1 year at 6% per year, the future value after 1 year is $106. That's 6% interest. The future value, again, is equal to $106. This could be repeated for several time periods, but there's an easier way, meaning that you could, again, as I was saying before, year one, $1,000, 10%, $1,100 after 1 year, and then 10% on top of that. You tack on another $110 on top of that, and on you go. This is You can do this on an individual basis, but there's an easier way to do that, and that is through the powers, if you will, that we'll go through this. Future value is equal to that present value, so that $100, and 1 plus whatever that interest rate is, and within the parentheses to the nth power. However many times that you're going to be doing this, is it n means the number of periods, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, etc. So in that last example, again, we start with $100, and 1 plus 0.06, 6%, 1.06 to the first power is equal to, after 1 year, is $106. Okay. If you left the money in for 2 years, what that means is that future value is equal to 100, again with the open parentheses, the bracket, 1.06, 1 plus that 6%, 1.06, for 2 years to the second power gets us to $112.36. So we're going from $106, and then we're tacking on another 6% on top of that to get us to that for the second year, that to get us to that $112.36. Notice that the $6 interest for 2 years would give us $12. Again, the extra 36 cents is a result of that compounding. So 6%, $100 is $6. So you do that for 2 years, plus the additional 36 cents. Doesn't sound like much, but this is what helps it to grow that much more quickly. Another example, $650 interest, 8% for 10 years. So we're using, again, the same example. Future value, or the same formula. Future value is $650, the principal that's invested. 1 plus 8%, 1.08 for 10 years to the 10th power. So we're going through this for 10 years. We're multiplying by 8% every year, but meaning that we're multiplying by 8% the first year, and then we're taking the sum of that interest, adding that interest into that, so the new principal becomes the interest plus that principal from the previous year, and we're multiplying it again by that same interest rate. So this is why it expands, why it grows so much. Over a 10-year period, your $650 more than doubles to $1,403.30. It's funny, in finance, we pay attention to pennies. I shouldn't say that, but we really, this is something, I think it's human nature. When we're looking at this, we see how dear, how important money is to all of us. So this is something to consider, the number of decimals that you look at, for example. The future value, the table method. So that was the calculation. On the table, look at the table in the book, and you want to see the future value of a single amount, okay? Well, meaning that it doesn't change. You're not going to be adding anything to it as a single amount. Multiply the table factor by the amount deposited of all future value factors. It's greater than 0, okay, for 1 rather. Example, $650 invested at 8% for 10 years. The factor is 2.159. So it more than doubles, of course, is what we're saying. So future value is equal to 650 times 2.159, which gets us to the $1,403.35. And there's always rounding that goes on, so keep that in mind. These aren't exactly perfect, but it gets you close enough, okay? Expression is close enough for government work, but in reality, it's close enough because it gets us to very close to the number that we want. And if you're off by 10 cents, don't stress about it. Just understand that there's some rounding involved, okay? Using the calculator, using that Texas Instrument calculator or the Hewlett-Packard calculator, it's pretty much the same. There's some weird things you go through either one of them, but N means the number of time periods. So if we're looking at 10 years, that's the N, 10 years, right? And the interest rate per period is that interest rate per year, the interest rate per period. If we're looking at annual periods, we're looking at interest rates for that period. So looking at starting with the N, 10 years, interest rate of 6% or 8%, whatever that was. And the PV is the present value. You can either plug that in or calculate it. So you would either plug in or calculate present value or future value, or payments for that matter. So you'll one of these would be unknown, if you will. You're trying to calculate what that is. So present value is means the present, PV is present value, payment is the amount paid per period. So for example, if you're not kicking anything in, you'll put a 0 in there, all right? And future value would either calculate it, or if you know it, that would get us back to that present value. Anyway, that's the idea behind this. So in this example, $650 at 8% for 10 years. The number of years or the number of periods is 10. Interest rate is 8. Again, make an emphasis when they're talking about these financial calculators, they don't want the 0.08, they just want whatever that percent is, and that's 8% for each of those periods, where the periods are years rather. Present value, you always put in negative value. Anyways, if you're trying to figure out what the future value is, you always put in a negative value. In this case, negative 650, payments are 0 because we're not adding anything to this over a period of time. So the future value in 10 years comes to that $1,403.30 in this case. It was 35 cents on the TVM tables, okay? So the next is using Microsoft Excel, for example. I don't know if anything else is, I mean, I know there are others out there, but I think the only thing I've ever used in the last 20 years is Microsoft Excel. So the financial functions are very straightforward here too. In some ways, you get lost in the weeds, but if you learn these, how these function, you have to go through and practice a bit on the calculator or using Excel, understanding what all this means. So this is using the function button, where there are functions that are out there for future value, but you can do this on your own. Of course, you can type this in. Just type in equals FV, open bracket, and you're not going to put in rate. You're going to put in whatever that rate is, whatever that interest rate is. In this case, now rather than putting an 8 in there, you put in 0.08, for example. Number of periods was 10 years, plug in a 10, and these are commas. So there's the interest rate, 0.08, periods, 10, comma, the payment amount, which is 0, we said before, and the present value is, we still use that negative number for the 650, and the type would be 0, okay, with the closed bracket on the end. And so this is, again, just we're looking at simple interest over this period of time, or excuse me, it's compounded, but at any rate, you're compounding over on an annual basis over a period of 10 years. When you press enter, the answer will be in the cell, 140330 again. That's rounding and so on and so forth. And as a note down here, we'll ignore the type portion. It's just not something to go into at this point. So time value of money, these are the websites that are out there. There are tons of them out there. So if you have the opportunity or the inclination, you could go out there and rather than going through those other processes, which I want you to do at this point, these apps that are out there are something that not to worry about. You want to understand what the process is. So the time value money methods, again, this kind of synopsizes it. Formula, the time value money table, financial calculator, spreadsheet software, right? So the actual writing out the formula, doing this by hand on the first one, using the time value money tables, if you will. The next one will be the financial calculator, and the one you have access to as well would be Microsoft Excel. So you can figure these things out, but it's important to do that first one formula. Time value of money is fine. The tables are out there available for you, and also the spreadsheet, the Microsoft Excel, if you're so inclined. Series of deposits. This means that you're going to be depositing money over a period of time. So you're starting out with that $1,000 and you're adding $100 a year on top of the interest. So there are these things that are you're looking at how this changes, if you will, over a period of time. So long as we're looking at constant increases. So you're adding $100 a year in to whatever your savings were originally, plus the interest that's involved, the compounded interest. So we'll let's walk through it. So an annuity, again, is equal to a series of equal deposits at equal intervals, earning a constant rate. Okay, so So we're looking at consistency, and I've got another another cough here. Sorry about that. Examples of this would be retirement savings or any other savings goal in which you deposit an equal amount over equal intervals. So if you're taking out, you're paying yourself first. So you're taking out a certain amount out of your paycheck, setting it aside on a consistent basis, month after month or year after year. Okay. Future value of a series of deposits. So we're taking into account those constant deposits, if you will. So the amount that you're adding on a regular basis. The formula is again FV, future value, is equal to annuity, and then 1 plus that interest, and whatever the power, whatever that time period we're looking at, minus 1 divided by, again, that interest. For example, if you deposit $50 per year at 7% for 6 years, you have, so we're starting with 0 in this case. So we're looking at $50. That's the annuity, the amount that you're actually adding into it. And you're multiplying it by 1 plus that 7% to the 6th power for 6 years minus 1. And then you're dividing it by that percentage again. And that brings you to $357.66. So you're adding $50 per year over the 6 years. So if you just had the $50 per year over the 6 years, it would be $300. But by doing this annuity, by adding this in and compounding the interest associated with it, you're getting an additional $57.66. So this is important because this is another way of growing your money, growing your investment. Whatever you start out with, if you start out with 0, that's fine. But so long as you're going forward, remember, whatever you set aside to start with, that's going to be compounding. Plus, whatever you add to it is going to be added to that as well. It's going to be compounded as well, but to a lesser extent, because you're starting a little later. That's fine. This is a great way of paying yourself first. Future value, a series of deposits, a table method. Again, rather than doing the calculation, you go to the table and you do the same thing. And I won't walk through this, but take your time and consider these things, because that's what the beauty of these tables is, that it makes it simpler to see again what the factor is. So you're looking at 7% for 6 years, so that's 7 times 7.153 times that $50 is what we're saying, to get us to that $357.65. And again, the rounding bit, there's always that disclaimer in here, because we're looking at rough numbers. And if you're doing this at a bank or at a credit union or whatever, they don't round. They round after the cents, if you will. Anyway, after the final calculation, they would round probably. So this is using the financial calculator, and the number of periods, 6 years. The interest, remember, it's 7, not the 0.7, but 7. Present value of 0. So we're starting with 0, and the payment, that annuity that we're kicking in, is $50 per year, right? So the future value, this is the calculation. It comes out $357.66. So you input all your knowns, that 6%, or excuse me, the 6 years, that 7 or 7%, the present value being 0, and the payment amount, that annuity amount of $50 that you're kicking in, and you would just plug in future value, and it would kick out $357.66. Rounding. Spreadsheet, this is going through Excel. Same idea. Future value, the rate, periods, payment, PV, and then the type. Remember, ignoring type for the moment. Future value times, open bracket, 0.07. So in this case, we don't say 7, we put 0.07. That's the percent. Comma, 6 for 6 years, comma, -50. That's the amount that we're kicking in on an annual basis. 0 is the present value, how much we're starting with. And the type, again, is 0. Keeping things simple, and boom, what pops out is that, again, $357.66. So this is again where the type comes into play. It's important to know this too. because for annuities, you can change the type from 0 to 1 if the payments occur at the beginning of the year instead of the end. So what that means is that, are you going to be starting from day 0 with the $50, or you know that you're adding to it, or are you starting from at the end of that period? If you're starting at the end of the year, when you're kicking in that annuity, when you're kicking that amount in. So this is an important part to be included, you know, when interest starts. Because if you have a balance of 0 through the year, you're not going to be earning any interest for that year. Whereas if you did kick in for $50, for example, at the beginning of the year, at the end of year 1, you would end up with 50 times 0.07, which would be $3.50. So you would, at the end of year 1, you would have $50 or $3.50, for example. So that's why it's important to understand what that type means when you're moving into these annuities. Present value, the current value of a future amount based on certain. So now we went to future value. Now we're coming back to present value. The current value of future amount based on a certain interest rate and time period. The current value of an amount desired in the future. How much to deposit now to obtain the desired total in the future. Discounting. This is so we went from annuity or compounding to discounting. And so discounting is going from some time ahead back to the current, what that's currently worth, if you will. So that if you had wanted $1,000 today, what is the future value that you would have to be looking at to have that $1,000 today? You know, what that $2,000 looks like in today's terms, 10 years 10 years earlier. And the reason that this is important is this is where the prices are at. So if you want to buy something that in 10 years time is going to be $2,000, you have to understand what the interest rates are, so on and so forth, and how much it is, what the purchase price is now in order to have that instrument that is going to give you $2,000 going forward. So it's going to be some number, presumably, it better be some number less than that. And so it gets kind of weird thinking about it, but just consider this. So for example, you want to buy you want to buy a bond or any kind of a loan for them. Well, just back to our simple idea, $2,000. You want it's going to be worth $2,000 in 10 years. So how much is that $2,000 worth to you today? Meaning, if you had $1,000, how long would it take for that to double? Let's just assume that it would take 10 years. You know, all the interest rates and all the other stuff combined. So what that means is that for that $2,000 promise in 10 years, you're willing to pay how much for it today? $1,000. That's all it is. That's all we're talking about. Keeping it very, very simple. It gets complicated, but still very simple at its root. So the present value formula for this we're talking about is present value is equal to the future value, 1 divided by 1 plus that interest rate, and then to the number of periods, the time, if you will, the number of years or whatnot that we're looking at. For example, if you want $1,000 5 years from now, and you can earn 5% on your deposit, present value is equal to, again, $1,000 in the future value, 1 over 1.05, that 5% to the 5th power. And then what that equates to is it brings it back to the current, the value, again, the present value of $783.53. So what that means is that $1,000 that you're getting in 5 years from now is worth actually $783.53 today. Simple, straightforward. And I know, again, this can get very confusing, so just try to keep it as simple as you can. Using the tables makes life a lot easier because you can just plug these things in, but I want you to walk through those calculations that we showed before. So in this case, we're looking at the present value as $1,000 and using the the present value factors, and of course they're less than zero. Um, uh, uh, because what we're saying is that what I mean by that is that okay, amount deposit, all present value factors of less than zero, doesn't matter. Anyways, we'll get into that. If you want $1,000 5 years from now, you can earn 5% on your money. Present value is equal to $1,000 times 0.784, which is equal to $784, which is, again, we're rounding in this case. Less than zero, actually, but that's fine. You get the idea. Just you would pluck the numbers off of the time value, the present value rather, table. Okay. Financial calculator and number of years, 5. Interest rate is 5, again, not 0.05. Present value is something you're going to get at, so you don't know what that is yet. The payment is 0. The future value, we're looking at, again, a negative number being 1,000. And the present value is $783.53, what it's worth today. And you'll notice you probably don't have access to financial calculator, but in the TIA, Texas Instrument TI BA2 Plus, you must press compute or CPT before solving. Notice you must enter 1,000. Otherwise, the answer will be negative. Anyway, it's just an odd way of looking at it, but just the way it is with these different financial calculators. Okay, so the spreadsheet, same idea. Plugging this into Excel, you have a cell in Excel, and you have an equal sign, PV, and then open bracket, 0.05. So it's 0.05, but that's the interest rate, comma, number of periods, 5, comma, 0 is the actual payment, so there are no payments. And the future value we were looking at is 1,000, it's a negative number, and the type is 0. Okay, so when you press enter, the answer, of course, would come out $783.53. The present value of a series of deposits. Okay, so we're changing things a little bit. We're adding on a little bit of a different twist on this. The formula is the present value is equal to that annuity, whatever that payment amount is, 1 minus 1 over 1 plus the interest and to the nth power to the number of periods that were involved. For example, if you want to withdraw $400 per year, so now we're taking out over a period of time. you want payments of $400 per year. So what is it that you're going to need? All right, what is it that you're going to need in terms of in order to fund that $400 coming out per year for 9 years? Your money is earning 8%. How much should you deposit today? How much do you need in present value in order to withdraw that $400 per year? So we start with that annuity. That for present value is equal to that $400, and then it's 1 minus. This is 1 minus 1 over 1.08%, and we're looking at 9 years, so it's the 9th power divided by 0.08, and we would arrive at $2,500 roughly, right? So I'm rounding myself. So we would need to have $2,500 today in order to get $400 per month for a period of 9 years, and you're earning 8% on that. So that's what you need to have on account today. All right. So moving on using the table. These are all different tables, whether we're talking about present value, series deposits, etc. All the tables are laid out there for you. So if you want to withdraw, the example again is that you want to withdraw $400 per year for 9 years. Your money is earning 8% per year. Deposit, what you need today is 400 times that 6.247 that you're pulling off the table in order to get to that $2,500. Okay. Financial calculator, same idea. The N is 9. The interest rate per year, if you will, that IR/year is 8, and it's not 0.08, but which it should be. It's 8. You don't know the present value. The payment, the annuity, the amount that's being paid would be $400 or negative. Make sure you put negative in there. And you're looking at zero future dollars, meaning that you're going to draw that down until you get to zero. So the present value, the amount that you need to fund that, again, when you click on PV, and again, you've got to use that CPT, the compute and with the Texas Instrument calculator to get to that $2,500 that you need in present value in order to fund that $400 per year over 9 years. Okay. Lastly, of course, again, we're looking at we're looking at an Excel spreadsheet, plugging these things in, play with them, take your time, walk through them. If you have the inclination and or the time to do this, it's worthwhile because it becomes second nature to you. Even me walking through these right now, it's making me think about these things. And you think about what it is that you're all about as you're trying to, what is it you're trying to achieve? What is your goal? And they're very simple, but it gets complicated because they're very specific steps you have to walk through. So here we are in Excel, equal sign, PV, open bracket, 0.08 is at 8%, comma, 9 years, and negative 400. Remember, you have to use the negative numbers in here. That's, in this case, it kind of makes sense because you're pulling out $400 per year, right? So 400, comma, and then 0 is what you're going to end up with in the end. The type is 0, meaning that you're not putting anything in from the start. So we're starting from the end of year one, or excuse me, we're starting from the very beginning. So when you press enter, the answer again will be that $2,500 roughly. So again, drawing back, looking at this, what we just walked through. We start with our current financial situation. This is imperative. This is very important. So again, I left you with that Excel spreadsheet, included that Excel spreadsheet in the packet that's available to you to figure out to walk through on your own, to come up with your own financial strategy, if you will, going forward. But you have to understand where you're at. Number 2 is develop your financial goals. What that means is that you have to kind of think about where it is that you want to be, where can you be? And I would encourage you to go beyond where you think you can be, meaning stretch it out a little bit. Someone once told me, and I kind of subscribe to this, I kind of agree with this to a point. The only assets that are really important, aside from, assets, houses, cars, so on, things that we acquire, the things that are really important in terms of being able to kind of live your life in the manner which you would like are financial assets. I know it sounds probably kind of crude in some ways, but if that's keeping it as simple as possible, it might be of some help. It's not to say you don't have to have a house to live in, or you don't have to have a vehicle to drive. It's just that when you're thinking about things, try to focus on the financial things. The financial things are the things that get you to the point where you can acquire these things, where you can take care of yourself, where you can take care of other people. So you have to develop those financial goals. And then number 3 is identify alternative courses of action. So that means you have to have a plan A, B, C, D, etc. And you just keep going. You walk through all these things, these different ideas that you might consider. So evaluating these alternatives, if you will, you have to go through and assess the risk that's involved. Consider the time value of money, the opportunity cost associated with not consuming, with setting money aside, and what it is that you absolutely have to have in life, the essentials. Don't deny yourself if you can help it. Try to. It's good to be to be frugal, to save, and so on and so forth, but not to the point where it becomes detrimental to yourself. Anyway, these are all things to kind of think as you go forward. And the considerations, of course, you have are your life situation, the personal values, and economic factors, meaning that life situation. How's your health? Um, do you have lots of kids or no kids, or do you want to have kids? Do you want to have a family or not have a family, or where are you at in your life? You have to consider all of these things, where you're at in life in general. Are you starting out? You have to consider your limitations, of course, but also consider the possibilities going forward. So you have to be realistic, but you also have to be able to consider um, what the possibilities are. And possibilities, of course, if you give yourself the time that we talked about, and you educate yourself and become familiarize yourself with a lot of these things, it takes a lot of the mystery out of it. It's no longer a black box, if you will. You can unwind a lot of these things and kind of figure them out. Of course, all along you have to consider personal values, and well, the personal values meaning you don't want to give up yourself. In other words, you don't want to do something uh, that compromises your own values. Something what is it to gain the world and lose yourself in the process? Something along those lines, the philosophical piece that goes along with this. So, unto thine own self be true. Try to be, to keep things in perspective. Especially don't take yourself out of the equation. Think about these things, okay? And this is, yeah, I'm getting rather deep, but you get the idea. And the takeaway is that just again, being true to yourself. And as you're going forward, you can accomplish much more than you even realize. Um, Limitations in life, they say that it's better to be lucky than to be good. And that a lot of that has to do with economic factors that are beyond there's an expression in economics, it's called endogenous, or external factors. There's very little that we can control in many ways. Some things we have no control over at all on an individual basis. Um, Exogenous rather is external, and endogenous is internal. Uh, so there are changes on the outside that we have zero or very little control over, and that's the way it is. You've got to try to consider these things. Uh, Moving on to number 5, create and implement your financial action plan. What that means, of course, is that um, uh, you have to um, create that plan, try to implement it. If it doesn't work, back to the drawing board. You do this over and over again. That's 6. Review and revise your financial plan, because there are going to be changes. There are going to be changes, economic changes that you can't control, changes in your own life, increased income, getting married, having children, so on and so forth. All these things are factors, if you will, that are involved that you have to constantly reconsider. That's why this is a circle. Fortunately or unfortunately, we get do-overs constantly trying to figure these things out. And it's very important to understand something, and that is that once you make a decision, once the opportunity cost that we talked about, once you realize that opportunity cost, uh, once you have made that decision, the decision's done. It's fixed. It's a fixed cost, meaning you can't change it. That's from that point, you have to do what? Go back to number 1, determine your current financial situation. So you made a mistake. How many people do we know, all of us, live lives of regret? There's regret. And if you can reduce the amount of regret, or at least move on from it, it's a much healthier environment. It's not to say you ignore it, because you don't want to ignore these things, because you want to take them into account for the next time around, so you don't make that same mistake over again, right? Anyway, onward. So again, implement a plan for making personal financial career decisions, determine current financial situation, develop those financial goals, etc. We've walked through this already. Evaluate those alternatives, the consequences of those choices, evaluate the risk involved, etc., and review and revise that plan as needed. So you implement the plan. You can do all your considerations and evaluate the risk and so on and so forth, and you create the plan, implement the plan, and then it's back to the drawing board as you continue to continuously revise these things. And so with this, the financial action planning, I won't delve into it too much, but the idea is that where you're at right now and moving forward within a year, those are the short-term financial strategies, um, which lead to the long-term financial strategies, longer term, meaning, looking ahead beyond a year, of course, beyond 5 years, beyond 10, 15 years sometimes, where it is you want to be in 10, 15, 20 years from now. So all these things there are different plans, actions that we can take to achieve those goals as we excuse me, move forward. At any rate, I want you to kind of go through this. I'm not going to. I've gone way overboard so far as this first lecture is concerned anyway. So onward, career choice and financial planning, life work. This is something that there's something through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's called synthetic earnings. Anyways, the point is that in general, the more education you have, the more income that you earn in general. But there's a problem with that. And the problem is that the more education you have, the more cost, the more expenses incurred, and the higher the opportunity cost for sure, financially, and also the opportunity cost because you're spending money and you're also expending some time that you cannot retrieve, right? So you have to consider these things. But your work, this is why, planning out your work, what it is that you want to do with your time. Do you want to earn a lot of money? If you want to earn a lot of money, certainly there are people out there that earn a lot of money. If you're a cardiac surgeon, a thoracic surgeon, a heart surgeon, if you will, yes, they earn a lot of money. And I could argue, we could talk about this, whether they earn too much or whatever, but you have to also consider the life of a thoracic surgeon, of a heart surgeon, and that is that they probably typically, not only do they have people's lives in their hands, but they also are probably working at least 12 hours a day, or at least 5 days a week, if not 16-hour days, 5, 6, 7 days a week sometimes. Anyways, so all these things walk through with these career choices. There's risks and there's opportunity costs that are involved, and considering all these things as you kind of go forward. Okay. Number 3, career choices require periodic reevaluation. I've been through at least, I've worn several hats in my work life, if you will. And have I always made the right decision? You kind of pick and choose what you can when you can. You never know where life is going to take you. So the same thing happens with your work situation. Try to find your niche out there, the thing that you really do enjoy. And as someone once told me, I keep throwing this someone under the bus, but as someone once told me that if you find a job that you really love, then you'll never work a day in your life. I'm not quite there, but I feel that teaching has certainly brought me much closer to that goal. Changing personal and social factors require continuous assessment of your work situation, meaning that do you want to commute, spend an hour, 2 hours a day in the car commuting, being away from your family? All these things you have got to consider. These are personal, social things that you want. So again, walking through this, financial decisions are affected by life situations, personal values, economic factors, things that we've already talked. This is a summarization, basically. The major elements of financial planning, and this covers the entire book, obtaining those resources for financial planning, planning itself, saving, borrowing, spending, managing your risk, investing, retirement, and estate planning. All these things kind of combine. You're doing these things over and over again, but we're stacking things on as we go forward to try to make some sense in an incremental way, a building block fashion. Again, our SMART acronym. S is specific, M is measurable, A is that action oriented. So you're measuring and you're taking steps to to make those readjustments, so on and so forth. You have to be realistic about these things, and it takes time. Last is T, taking time-based, right? Wrapping things up further, every decision involves a trade-off in personal opportunity cost, time, effort, and health. That's opportunity cost. Remember, your next best competitive option. Do you want a job where you're working 12 hours a day, but while you're earning good money, you're earning 12 hours a day, but that's time that you will never get back. So all these things have to be considered. And opportunity cost is something that we deal with on a minute-by-minute basis, frankly. Think about it. You make a decision to buy gasoline at a gas station. What is the price of the gas station on the street? Um, Everything that we do, including, again, this course. Spending the time to go through this course to develop your human capital. There's an opportunity cost involved. Financial opportunity cost, specifically, we're looking at the time value, it's based on time value, money, interest rates. This is that opportunity cost. It's interest rates, your rate of return, how much you're getting in return for being separated from your money, and for how long, how much risk are you willing to take, etc. And again, lastly, personal financial planning involves determining a financial situation, developing financial goals, identifying alternative courses of action, evaluating those alternatives, creating and implementing a financial plan, review, and redo. Again, walking through those 6 steps over and over.